Mansfield today on a Monday. Good morning to you. A fresh new week. Let's see what it has in store for us. Good morning, Chris Gibbons.
Jeremy, a very good morning to you. Locally, it's another very bitty week with a public holiday on Wednesday. Good for everyone who's done their planning well, and combined with Easter and next week's May Day holiday, but in fact, bad for the economy. The evidence is clear. If you're going to have public holidays, you need them spread out. You need them, if you can, on a Monday. That maximizes away time, makes for a much more even distribution of the benefits to the leisure industry. But I shall enjoy my lie-in on Wednesday in any event. On the calendar, we don't have anything of major significance. Tuesday sees the Reserve Bank's leading business cycle indicator. That's a number that theoretically points the way forward. Then on Thursday, we have the producer price inflation numbers, the so-called price at the factory gate. Now that's a useful number because the inflation that manufacturers are facing feeds directly into the main inflation number. We're looking at 10.8% year on year, up from 10.5% in the previous month. That is high and frankly, not very comfortable. And then on Friday, we'll have the M3 money supply number, another factor we think about when we talk inflation. We end off with one that is, in my opinion, more important, the private sector credit extension figure. Sounds awfully technical, but it means how much are we borrowing? And how much are we borrowing to start new businesses or fund expansion or just keep us off the street?
What about further afield, Chris?
We're smack into earnings season in the US, Jeremy, and this coming week's going to see some of the very big tech stocks reporting. Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, Alphabet, parent of Google, Meta Platforms, parent of Facebook, and Intel will all be revealing their numbers. And as Seeking Alpha reminds us, we've already had some sizzling figures from the likes of Tesla and some major disappointments like Netflix. So we're going to be watching with great interest. We'll also have the US GDP numbers and a fair amount of other reasonably important data like consumer confidence over there. And it's a similar picture in Europe, consumer confidence in Germany, France, Italy, and so on. We also have a couple of big speeches ahead from European Central Bank Chief Christine Lagarde, Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey.
And all of this after a fairly rough week on the markets. First of all, Chris, give us an overall view.
Well, that's for sure, Jeremy. Let's start at home. Like just about everyone else, the JSE's down. The all-share index on Friday evening down 2%. Year to date, 4.2% just this month alone. That's the all-share index. Top 40 a little worse, down 2.5% year to date, 4.6% in April. Don't forget that at one point, compared with a lot of our overseas peers, we were looking quite smart. Throw in inflation at 6%, and we're hurting just like everyone else. Consumer inflation's just come in 5.9% year on year, to be accurate, 100%. And the Rand's also done a U-turn a couple of weeks back. Remember, we were everyone's favorite emerging market currency. Now, it's the one that everyone is trying to sell. We've dropped 6.5% against the dollar in the last 3 weeks. Now, part of that is dollar strength. Last week in particular, it was clear that investors were all of a sudden taking a very jaundiced view of our prospects and moving out of the currency.
But why? I mean, what's changed here?
A number of factors, Jeremy, have come into play, but chief amongst them, I think, are the floods that have hit KZN. There's the direct cost of the cleanup. Where's that money going to come from? The answer is government, of course, but there will definitely now be added pressure on government debt, which we were just maybe thinking about getting under control. The indirect cost comes onto the broader economy. Think about Toyota, for example, down in Durban, writing off several thousand cars because of water damage, or Sappi shutting down paper mills, the damage to the sugarcane farmers, and so on. There's also stuff that we're starting to see, like the fact that not only is the port of Durban blocked because of damaged roads, but our other ports aren't working either. Well, not as well as they could. You know, with Russia heavily sanctioned because of the war in Ukraine, we have a major opportunity to replace many of their exports with our own. But we can't get things like coal to Richards Bay because Transnet's not working properly. And when we do get to the ports, they're highly inefficient, massively unionized, and very, very expensive. I was talking, Jeremy, on Saturday to a fruit exporter who's moving his entire business to Maputo. The port up there works. It's not as expensive as Durban. The Mozambicans have brought in Dubai Port World to run the place. They are hungry for the business. The person I was in conversation with said that it would probably be a temporary move. But he added there was a strong possibility it might become permanent if it was successful. You know, with much of our fruit exports, it's all about speed to market. You take something like table grapes, an extra 10 days on the quayside, you can kiss that load goodbye.
Not just the floods, though. There's more to our decline than that, isn't there?
For sure, but I think the floods have been the catalyst. The other factors I think are quite well known. Load shedding is back. We're hardly into winter yet, but the lights are going on and off. That looks set to remain the case for at least the next 12 months. And all of this in the context of a global inflation and the war in Ukraine.
Important. And then to note that we're not the only market that's taking strain. The developed world is also under pressure, particularly the US.
Our markets were under pressure, as we've discussed, but the US is looking a great deal worse. Inflation there at its highest level in 40 years. A lot of people are very unhappy. The Economist, for example, is scathing in its criticism. This is the latest cover of The Economist, in which it argues that Joe Biden's $1.9 trillion stimulus package, introduced as soon as he won the White House, was unnecessary. The US economy was already moving out of the pandemic in a very effective way. As a result of the stimulus, inflationary pressure was bound to build, and the Fed should have seen it coming. It didn't, or if it did, it didn't act quickly enough. And now it's having to scramble. Here's US Fed Chair Jay Powell confirming that interest rate hikes are going to be higher than the usual, steady, controlled 0.25% every couple of months.
We really are committed to using our tools to get 2% inflation back. And I think if you look at, for example, if you look at the last tightening cycle, which was a 2-year string of 25 basis point hikes from 2004 to 2006, inflation was a little over 3%. So inflation is much higher now, and our policy rate is still more accommodative than it was then. So it is appropriate, in my view, to be moving a little more quickly. And I also think there's something in the idea of front-end loading whatever accommodation one thinks is appropriate. So that does point, that points in the direction of 50 basis points being on the table.
As soon as Powell made those comments at the IMF and the World Bank spring meetings in Washington, US markets went south. On Friday evening, the Dow, the S&P 500 both down 2.8%, the Nasdaq down 2.6%. Year to date, the Dow down nearly 7%, the S&P 500 over 10%, the Nasdaq down nearly 18%. As I've said about our own market, add in inflation, 8.5% in the US at the moment, which means that if you're invested in the S&P 500 as a broad measure, you are down 15% year to date. Ouch.
Eesh, ain't I pain. But surely, Chris, this damage to the markets is not all about inflation, or should I say, not just about inflation. There's also the small matter of a war in the Ukraine.
Indeed, but the problem about this war, Jeremy, leaving aside the humanitarian aspect for a moment, is that it also leads to inflation. Think about the pressure on resources prices, oil, natural gas, wheat and grains, cooking oil, and so on. All of those feed into the inflation narrative. Here's a fact for you to consider. We know that classically you choke off inflation by hiking interest rates. Our own Reserve Bank's doing it. You just heard Jay Powell talk about doing it in America, and so on. How high interest rates go depends on the severity of the inflation. But never in US history have they had inflation this high without the subsequent rate hikes pushing their own economy into recession. We've just emerged from a pandemic-induced recession. Now it looks as though we, or at least the Americans, will soon be lurching back into another one.
You mentioned the spring meeting. I beg your pardon. If they were going to be holding the meeting in Springs, I'd be even more worried. The spring meeting of the World Bank and the IMF. Where are we there? Was South Africa represented?
Certainly we were. A very important opportunity for new Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana to introduce himself and to meet a number of the key players. In fact, Business Day reporting during the week that Godongwana met with US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen for bilateral talks. According to the newspaper, they talked about the impact of the commodities shock caused by the Ukraine invasion. Yellen also underscored Washington's support for South Africa's just transition away from coal. And we received a pat on the back for our leadership in responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. No mention, well, not officially at least, of any frostiness caused by our repeated abstentions in motions at the United Nations condemning Russia and its invasion.
And finally, Chris, it looks like Elon Musk has managed to scrape together the money he needs for his cash bid on Twitter.
Musk, the richest person in the world, Jeremy, worth some $273 billion. If my arithmetic is right, that's in the region of 4.3 trillion rand. But you know, much of that wealth is on paper. It doesn't exist in reality. It's shares in the various companies he owns. All very good until you're trying to do a buyout and you have to put real cash on the table. In this case, $46.5 billion. Well, we had reports during the week that Musk has put together a package that sees him on the hook personally for $33.5 billion of that total, and that includes loans against some of his shares in Tesla. The balance will come from various banks and private equity firms. No indication if the Twitter board is going to accept the offer, but if it does go through, it will be one of the biggest leveraged buyouts in history.
That's all very interesting, but are we clear yet what Musk wants to do with Twitter when he actually gets it?
Well, that is the million-dollar question, Jeremy, or should that be billion-dollar question? He's being very coy about the whole thing, muttering only about free speech. Does he think that Twitter is blocking free speech, I wonder? Well, it seems that way, but I can't help thinking that any organization that manages to silence Donald Trump deserves all the backing it can get.
Chris Gibbons, thank you very much for joining us once again on Mansfield Today. And that wraps it up for this Monday. We'll catch you next Monday once again with Chris. Bye-bye.